Good morning, everyone. My name is Wanda Book. I have an honor to moderate this panel discussion about moving public services to cyberspace among our distinguished guests, which is Anne Tuma, Marcin Krasuski, Robert Kośla. We are still waiting for Justyna Orłowska and Colonel Chmielewski. Okay. I would like to start the discussion with some kind of general remarks. So after this very specific year and a half of pandemic, what are your three main experiences, observations with moving public services into cyberspace? What have we learned from the pandemic about creating and moving public services to? Good morning, Mr. Colonel. We are happy you've joined us. What have we learned about creating and moving public services into cyberspace? What do we know today that we didn't know in January 2020? So, Annette?
Also, thanks for having me here today. And from the Estonian side, I would say, well, that was clear for us already for a very long time that digitalization is the new reality. But I would say that for the rest of the world, COVID time showed us that we really have to move everything online. And this was like a wake-up call, I would say, from all the aspects. And more services obviously moved online with countries that had never had this experience before, or that was somewhere like lagging behind in a way. And speaking of Estonian example here, did we have anything moving online after the crisis, or were there any additional services or so on? So there was, obviously. We implemented a couple of things as before the crisis. There was three things that we couldn't do online, which was marriage, divorce, and real estate. Right now, of course, also we can buy our real estate online thanks to COVID, I would say. And yes, I said thanks to COVID. But of course, when we think about real estate transactions, this is also something that really needs a high level of security. And obviously, we needed to implement and again, spend a larger budget on that aspect too. But of course, also, when we think about what I also said here, that like just the amount of people that were starting to use online services increased rapidly. Even in a country where everything was functioning online for years already, we still saw even 100% of increase in using a couple of services because people were stuck at home. So obviously, again, if people are more online, we also have to spend much more of a time on raising their awareness when it comes to cyber aspects there. Because obviously, by the time of pandemic, our hackers were not sleeping at all. So that's why they were also very active and trying to use this kind of vulnerability of people. And again, the elderly people moved online who had never done that before. Maybe younger generation students that had to study from home and so on. So everybody became much more weak in a way. So that's why we again had to really focus on raising the awareness and so on as well. So these maybe are the lessons. Yeah.
Estonia is one of the most, well, probably the most digital society in the world, but your path toward digitalization was not without the bumps. So in 2007, Estonia experienced a huge cyber attack. And as far as I know, you implemented several measures after that. But how those measures that you have undertaken in after 2007 are still accurate nowadays? What has changed between in 10 years? More than 10 years.
Well, if you really face difficult times, you always have an option whether you close down completely and say that we got scared and we're not going to do anything anymore. This is one of the options. We took the other way. So we said even more things should move online, but we just have to allocate more, again, budget to the cyber aspects as well there. So we understood again, that was like a wake-up call for Estonia, that the threat is just next to us. And we might see these things happening much more often in the future. So that's why we need to prepare for these attacks or to avoid them in the future. So obviously we started to provide much more for professional education to people as well. And one thing that really didn't change in a way, because Estonian approach, and if you talk about 2007 attack, there is a lot of misunderstanding what happened, and everybody are like, there, even in media, there was tons of articles saying, oh, in Estonia, they lost a lot of information and there was a huge catastrophe and all this kind of like fake stuff that actually didn't happen. So there was only 2 private banks that were affected. We had some just kind of like distribution in the year and then just like some kind of concerns. But luckily, as our entire system is very much decentralized, so there is no one central database, the hackers had a very difficult time to get access to any of our information. So in a way, I would say that we understood that the system that we had already created since 2001 by using the data exchange platform, the Xroad, was actually the right way to go. Because again, if the hackers would try to attack one single platform, they would get a very, very tiny amount of information. They don't have anything to do with that. So it's not very attractive to the hackers. If there would be one huge space of cloud or whatever that you can attack and then you could get access to tons of information, then obviously you become much more attracted to hackers too. So I would say from Estonian experience, 2007 was actually positive, so that we again realized that there is a threat. But of course also we got like a great proof that the systems we have been implementing are really working well.
Okay, I hope, Annette, that we will have a time to discuss your experience, Estonian experience, later on. But right now, I've heard that lessons learned. What kind of lessons did Google get?
Okay, so thank you very much for the invitation. So at Google, what we learned is that there is no way back from cloud, from internet, from digitization, and from online services. We basically saw that within a 1-year time frame, the e-commerce, the traffic, they all moved by 4 to 5 years. So we see a very huge consequential growth of usage of our services. And obviously, this raises a lot of challenges. As Annette said, the hackers, or as we call them, the bad actors, they do not sleep, and this is basically the race. Therefore, cybersecurity and safety online is one of the most important topics. This is one of the reasons why we announced this August a new pledge to invest $10 billion in new cybersecurity measures in the open source system. So we hope that this will make services more safe, basically, for people. And another lesson is the need or the lack of competences. We saw that public services, private businesses, they all moved online. Just imagine if lockdown had happened 10 years ago, I guess we would all be stuck with our traditional landline phones and with fax machines. Businesses would suffer, schools would not work, and the disruption would be even greater. But since the internet infrastructure and the software was already there, it kind of made easier to move different parts of the economy or public services online. But obviously, people were reluctant to use them. People did not have adequate skills to properly benefit from this. And we see this, for example, in education, where despite the fact that a lot of tools, and there are ours, there are competitors, there's huge choice and online what can be offered, people don't know how to use them. People are still reluctant, and we see huge bottlenecks in this. So in total, we see that there is no way out, there is no escape from this. And obviously this poses new challenges and new threats, but we are ready to face them, and we are looking forward in the future.
Okay, you stressed the cloud. because, well, cloud is called everywhere nowadays. And my question is, from the perspective of the end user, what is the difference? Is there any difference for the end users, whether this is cloud or he's using functionalities from cloud or not?
Obviously, the cloud brings a lot of benefits. And it's not only remote access, but there is a number of different analytics or different resources that can be applied to the cloud, combining different sets of data, bringing down the costs for end users, and improving cybersecurity. A lot of people are still reluctant and feel that, maybe trusting some third company, which is maybe located outside of this particular country or wherever, maybe this is less safe, and they still rely on on-premise services which are located somewhere in the basement. We get it, but I think that the whole discussion has moved forward, and the whole discussion between on-premise resources or solutions and these on cloud, the benefits of cloud is much bigger. Obviously, they are dangerous. We saw, for example, I think it was this summer, when one of our competitors in France, the data center got burned, and basically a lot of services across the world stopped working. So even though if we move to cloud, we have to address some security challenges, but I think that I can speak for Google, but we are definitely doing this, and I guess other competitors are moving in the same direction. And as I said, there is no way back, and the benefits for end users are clear.
Okay. I believe that I'm going to go back to both of you to discuss the need for upskilling people nowadays, also in terms of cloud. But now I would like to move on to Mr. Director and to your observation after this year and a half. What has changed? What do you know now that you didn't know in January 2021 especially about creating public services in cyberspace?
Thank you very much. I think a lot of has changed, at least the perception of the services and the way how those services can be delivered. So, and I think after this 1.5 years, when we initiated our implementation of the concept, general concept approved at the national level, as I would like to remind that the Council of Ministers adopted the concept for the initiative of common IT infrastructure. It was not about just IT infrastructure, that was about the new model for processing of information and delivering the services for citizens. So in October 2019, the government adopted the concept that was actually implementing the hybrid cloud model to support, of course, modern applications. And now we know after 1.5 years that this approach was correct, because from the beginning, from the first days of lockdown, we've been able to propose and to request public cloud services, and we, in parallel, to also establish the basic capabilities to deliver government cloud services to citizens. And of course, this is something that, from after the 1.5 years, we know right now that to make a successful, to achieve the success, we need, first of all, national policy. That's about how the initiative will be delivered. We need also national requirements for security, talking, of course, about infrastructure and end devices and requirements for the location of data, for instance. We need, of course, resilient infrastructure. It means we need to implement some models not dependent on specific location, but actually the cloud computing is the model. It's not a location, it's the model of processing data. And at the end, we need modern applications. So only by those three components, we've been able actually to address the huge demand for the services in case of lockdown, when people stayed at home, when, of course, our service providers on the government side also stayed at home. So we know very well that this is the direction that we should continue. We should invest more at the policy level. We should continue our investment in the hybrid infrastructure, and we should invest more in modern applications.
Okay, so maybe that's going to be a question for both of you gentlemen, because we have here also a military perspective. Because I think that we all agree that generally economy is global. but security, well, mostly it's national. And my question is, goes back to the cloud. Do you think that we should migrate our public services to the cloud, which will be provided by the commercial entity from other state? Is that a good approach? Is that safe approach? What's your perspective, gentlemen, both of you? So,
who starts?
Okay. Yes, I think that depends. This is the lawyer answer. That depends.
Yeah.
Of course, it depends. So, of course, there is no silver bullet approach. That need to be combined. That's why I refer to hybrid infrastructure. So there is a need and there is an operational rationale to really migrate some data into the public cloud, and there is also operational need and also security need to leave some data in the government and operate some data in government cloud. So, and this model we reflected in our both in the initiative of common IT infrastructure adopted by the Council of Ministers, plus we supplemented this by the cybersecurity requirements for cloud computing, where we address these two models. So, what kind of data can be transferred to open public cloud, and we defined 4 levels of SCCO. It means cybersecurity requirements. 4 levels, starting from the basic one: open data. Of course, we can locate this data anywhere. Plus, we have legally protected information. Then we require compliant data centers, compliant with the regulations, like, for instance, GDPR. And the 3rd level, it's about national sensitive resources, like national registries that should be located in government cloud. And the 4th level, it's about classified data, but I think Colonel Chmielewski can refer to this area as well.
I knew it, that I will be getting the hard one. First of all, thank you for introducing me, and of course, thank you for seeing National Cybersecurity Center as a hub for introducing new technologies. In military, we have a very strict role for, first of all, introducing new systems, and of course, securing them. We have to do it by ourselves. We have our SAI organization, which introduces and make us, first of all, develop our own systems, to the accreditation process for us, etc., etc. Thus, at this moment, and I have to state it here, we have no approval to introduce our services for confidential systems or any classified systems and move them into the cloud. Even if the system is providing or processing non-confidential data, we have to stick with our own private cloud solutions and our own data centers. Thus, we know for sure that in NATO there are registered, proven deployment of cloud-based systems and services, but we are observing those technologies and we perceive them as a way ahead for us to, first of all, think about cloud services. In some parts of Polish armed forces, we introduced several services hosted by outside or commercial vendors, but they are not used by strictly military personnel. So we can move some parts of the systems into the cloud, but they, I'm speaking about Wojska Obrony Terytorialnej and some parts of the personnel gathered around them, for just accessing those services from their own private equipment. Thus, our perception into the cloud-based environments and the security gathered and developed by the vendors who are providing the cybersecurity monitoring inside the cloud.
Okay, so to sum up those 2 approaches, like civilian one is generally you are okay with cloud, but, and from military perspective is generally no, but. Okay, so we will see how that's going to work in the future. But I would like, Mr. Colonel, to have you the chance to answer the initial question, the initial question about your perspective, your experience from this well, very difficult time all of us went through.
Yeah, actually, it was a very difficult time because in 1 year we had to modernize a large parts of our networks. We've done this efficiently. First of all, we've invested.
You mean the infrastructure?
Infrastructure. You have to, first of all, so from the point of view, so from technology development and technology delivery point of view, we had to be able to deliver VTC services, all the services who can organize remote communication inside the network. So for our internal systems, we had to modernize large scale of our technologies, and we had to do it in very strict time regime. So we had 6 months of time to develop our own very efficient way of communicating. So this is the first.
It was doable.
So the process was it had to be very efficient. First of all, it was very costly, of course, but the costs came not only from the technologies we've developed, but from the brain power and the people who have been involved in the process. So this is the first part. And the second part, and I have to state it here because I'm from IT department, let's say. So this was my point of view. And the second point of view is the cybersecurity point of view. We had to secure the whole systems. So a lot of brain power and a lot of manpower had to be introduced into developing our own way of monitoring the systems and securing the communication inside the Ministry of Defense and our Polish armed forces. A lot of effort had been developed in software and, of course, in hardware. We've done this since 2019, I can say. So this is this was the year when we started to think about systematic point of view, how to organize, how to secure, how to involve our users in terms of their knowledge, their thinking about security, and about discouraging any interaction with their private and their professional domain. Because this is our point of view. You have to separate those two domains from each other to securely communicate inside the professional network.
Okay, Annette, if I may ask you to elaborate a little bit more about your data embassy. You already mentioned that, but this is kind of infrastructure that you decided to create. You decided to build, also to provide. Well, to provide the necessary infrastructure for creating public services also.
Yeah, well, it's always good to take risky decisions, right? But of course, also it's even better if you have a backup plan. And our Data Embassy initiative is actually totally our backup plan. So thinking about where Estonia geographically is situated, who are our neighbors in the 2007 attack and what's happening in the world. Not only one of our neighbors, but there is maybe somebody else as well who have been to this in attacking us in one point. So we were thinking in a way that what will happen if this kind of very large attacks will happen. Are we going to lose everything that we have built in the last 30 years of our independence, as we do not have information on paper basis anymore, but everything is fully stored online? And then we were just feeling that we need a backup plan. And the Data Embassy became our backup plan. And if there are anybody here in the room who doesn't know what Data Embassy is, then pretty much we have backed up the most important institutions, in a way, their information, data sets to another country. And this other country is Luxembourg, where we have our servers. in one room. I'm not going to give you the location, sadly, here. But all the it is like basically like the physical embassy, but just has server rooms and there is nobody actually there. But all the Vienna Convention regulations and laws will apply. So that means if anybody else, I mean, somebody from Poland wants to enter the room, or if there is a fire in the building, then they can't access this because this belongs to Estonia, the land itself. So this is an embassy. But like many of you might think, okay, why Estonia chose Luxembourg?
Yes, that was my question, actually.
As a first location. Is there anybody who can think why Luxembourg was different than any other country? Why Estonia was like, okay, let's build it there.
It's cheaper.
Luxembourg cheaper? Well, I can't agree here.
Money is there.
Taxes is not much to do with that either, actually. There's much more political reasons and security too. Is there anybody here in the room who knows a country that has bad relations with Luxembourg?
This is neutral countries.
Well, I mean, think about Luxembourg itself. Like, it's just like politically one of the most independent countries in the world. Let's be honest. I do not know anybody who would want to attack Luxembourg, honestly, and hopefully there will not going to be anybody either. So obviously that reason was one of them, but not only that, because we also needed a country that has an infrastructure and an experience. No wonder why the European Court, the European banks are based in Luxembourg. So obviously these three major reasons: first of all, experience, infrastructure, and then obviously also, of course, also political reasons regarding being politically independent, and obviously we have great relations with them too, so that was the reason. But I can tell you that right at the moment, Estonia is looking for another country to have a second set of a data embassy. So if anybody has suggestions about any other country that has good relations with with the rest of the world and would have the infrastructure too, then let us know.
Well, I think that's immensely interesting approach. I think that point taken from, I mean, by Polish representatives. I would like to go back to I would like to go back to the competences. And Martin, you said that there is a need of upskilling, and also I think that every one of us who is interested in this matter. And who read some reports, see this urge to upskill people. But I mean, when it comes to digital competences. But at the same time, well, also Google says that when you are using cloud, well, it was never easier to create your own app. You know, I can see that, you know, this kind of inconsistency here. You know, so. You know, if we have a cloud and we have, you know, a tool which is extremely easy to use, and at the same time we are urging on upskilling digital competences, where where it comes from, actually, this gap, this inconsistency.
So I don't really know if there is an inconsistency here, because I feel that everyone can, I think, agree that digital services are becoming more and more user-friendly. It's super easy right now to develop your own app, set up your own web page, do almost everything online. And I think this is undisputable. But before this, let's say, digital world was somehow populated by, let's call them geeks, but people who were really interested in computers, in maybe they were a bit awkward type of people who were avoiding social contacts and spending most of the time online in front of the screens. And for them, even though the solutions were more difficult, they somehow learned them and made use of them. But now, I think the issue is that we have to move out from these, let's say, specific kind of people, not to put a bad word on them, because they are fabulous ones, and try to reach our elderly, try to reach people who are, for example, using old systems and who are used to work in a certain ways. And I think and this is a huge thing in management theory, for example, that changing old habits is the most difficult thing when it comes to changing organizations. So I think this is how and why this challenge still persists.
Okay, but do you think that, well, it's necessary to build, basic competences, or just upskilling, the competences that people already possess, that they?
I think it depends who are we talking to. Obviously, the elderly need some basic competences about how to set up the email, or, for example, how to search information, and I think it applies to disinformation online, which is obviously a huge problem and a huge issue right now. And I think everyone should pay attention to how we are getting our information from internet. The same goes for students and for pupils in school. I think the critical reception information is something crucial. But then when we are talking about IT specialists or people inside companies or organizations, whether public or private, they need different set of skills and different set of information to be provided. So I think we have to basically work both ways.
Okay, that was kind of initial question to another one, because I think that almost every country in the world year ago decided, or was at least interested in launching, kind of COVID apps which were supposed to support in the fight against COVID-19. Also, Poland was one of this country, one of these countries, and we have launched 2 apps. I don't know whether you had anyone from the audience had an opportunity to use it, but it was quarantine app and also Protego Safe app. And I think that we can honestly say right now that those apps, I mean, not only in Poland, but in the whole world, didn't meet the expectations. They were supposed to help in the fight. They were supposed to provide us a chance for normal life in the time of pandemic, increase the security. But I haven't heard about the country where actually these kind of maps pass the exam. So my question is, what happened and why did that happen? Annette, do you want to start?
I just want to take that one here, because when we think about, again, launching new applications, and that was a time where everybody were really, really scared what was happening. And there was, again, we have to move back to the dis and misinformation side as well, that in media, they were really talking about that there were actually countries where storing that information centralized, centrally storing information where people were moving and calling them whenever they went out or so on. People were scared. And if Estonia would have launched a similar application where we were collecting information centrally, I wouldn't download that application either, honestly. I don't want anybody just to track and see wherever I am. But we went to the API model, again, thanks to Google. And so again, nothing was centrally stored. It was all, again, even our channel system, decentralized in a way so that you couldn't really see, there wasn't any government institution who could see that this person has been affected and that system and so on. This information came again from the patient portal, and then again, there was no names there. For the first few months, actually, our application was quite successful, I would say. But then in the summer, things kind of slowed down by the numbers, few cases per day, so nobody really needed that they would need to have this application on the phone. But I would say this is all about just communication side, because if we would have done, and most of the EU countries had this decentralized approach too. So if we would have communicated that a little more in media, saying that nobody's collecting your personal information, it's just an application that helps you to be. So I feel that most of our problems are behind of lacking of communication.
Okay, yes, I also wanted to ask the representative of Google because you have a really wide perspective on this. You know how it looked like in many other countries. So please share that with us.
So yes, it is true that we have very wide experiences with this. We helped with our API a lot of governments in developing these contact tracing apps, and I would say that it is a mixed bag when it comes to actual outcomes of these applications, because there are countries in Southeast Asia like Taiwan, Korea, or even China or Hong Kong, where these apps were hugely successful, popular, and they actually saved a lot of lives. And we can all obviously argue whether the communication behind these apps was sufficient. Why did we have 2 applications in Poland instead of 1? Whether the user interface, user experience was okay or not. So obviously there probably could have been a lot of improvements to this. But even the most perfect application and the best communication ever will not manage to sway people to use it if there is lack of confidence in public institutions and in government. And we see this all around the world, that adoption of the government proposed solution varies, and it's very much correlated with confidence and trust where people rely on governments. So we know the story in Poland, we know how it developed in the US, but we see completely different picture in, for example, Southeast Asia. And even the best apps will not solve that kind of issues.
Okay, so Mr. Director?
Yeah, I agree with Marcin. Of course, that the technology will not solve the problem of trust. So that's a question, and that's why we approach. That's why we had a harmonized approach within European Union. So of course, just not to violate privacy, and just to agree to have a toolbox to agree some rules that are implemented by all member states. But of course, we see some, and we had some other references from other countries, not non-EU countries like Israel, like Singapore, or even like Taiwan, where of course this type of application was used for tracking, was used for the reporting of infected people. So this was completely different message. But Minister, you remember, of course, our expectations from home quarantine, and I think that was quite successful application because it was used by people to avoid physical contact or physical check of the presence of specific person on quarantine. So in parallel to Stop COVID application that actually people been reflected to install, not really trust in the privacy assumptions, then I think the quarantine was quite good. What's more, and I think one of the most successful application, it's not even application, it's a wallet. That's a wallet of M-Obywatel. This is M-Citizen. And the only one, I think Poland is the only country right now in Europe. We presented this solution. Right now you have an electronic, of course, certificate for your vaccination. But within the M-Obywatel, M-Citizen, you have your ID, you have your insurance for the car, you have other documents, driving license, you have, of course, the patient record available there. So that was something, and we've been asked by DigiConnect, by European Commission, to present this as one of the best practices that can be used by citizens. But of course, in this model, the citizen owns the data. So citizen decide what kind of data he would like to process. I think this is the model for future.
Okay, so 2 words, of course, about the applications. Actually, it's true. Very giant leap in terms of using the applications developed by Ministry of Digitalization. But in 2019, 2020, in the first part of the year, I was in Military University of Technology there. With my colleagues, we've actually developed 2 applications for hackathons there. So few observations from that. Even if we assured that the user will be anonymized, it won't have any connections to the Google account on the smartphone, any accounts at all, no usage of single sign-on, etc., etc. To develop heat maps moving individuals who have been tagged as COVID positive, etc., the users haven't been interested in using these kinds of apps because of the data sharing and possibility of sending out the information about your health, of exposing your personal information, of exposing of any personal information gathered from your phone, of any of your locations during the elements of your well-being in terms of pandemic. So I think the problem of European nations or sharing the data inside of European Union is the awareness. The people nowadays are aware of the information, of the data who have to be shared inside the cloud, and what we can do with the data using the artificial intelligence, with the location tracking, with the geofencing, etc., etc. You can do a lot of things using the data of spatial data, of course, and most of all, biomedical data gathered from the wearable sensors.
Okay, in the meantime, Justyna Orłowska has joined us.
The wrong Hilton, sorry for that.
Okay, okay. So we give you some time, you know, to put you in the picture. But to sum up what all of you said, it's not about competences when it comes to the, well, kind of a failure of COVID apps around the world. It was more about, of course, some of them were successful. Okay, I take your point, but it was more about the trust. It was all more about, you know, well, people becoming more and more aware, which is actually good. So because we want them to be aware, so we can, they know how to protect themselves and how to find themselves in the cyberspace. But you know, my question is, so how to build this trust? Because without it, there is no, you know, there is no public services actually, because there's no willingness to use it. And I think that you said it, that Mr. Director, that when people possess their own, are in the possession of the data, well, it's better. They feel more comfortable. They are more willing to use digital solutions. And I think that this is exactly how it looks like in Estonia, right? Because citizens of your country have this, you know, this title to possess, to erase anything from the cyberspace, which every data about them.
Well, I fully agree with you. It always comes to the trust aspect. And since very early days, we wanted to build that trust because that wasn't existing when we think about where Estonia came from. And what we have been provided to our people, and definitely is a very strong element there, is a thing called the data tracker. So that every single citizen can track exactly what government agency has been looking for their information, what time of the day, and which part of the information. And honestly, when we think about the medical records in the COVID times, then of course, we were interested if there has been any doctor just randomly checking our information. And I see that even today, there is actually plenty of requests to have done about my medical records by just the medical service provider institutions. And I know that this is because they do statistics. And I see that there is not a specific person just looking for my medical records, whether I had the last doctor visit a few weeks ago, but it's just the fact that whether I have been vaccinated or no. So they use that for statistics. But definitely providing this very large transparency is the key element. And if people feel that the power over their information is in their hands, not the other way around, they're much more willing to also use these services. And this is going to stay like that. But what concerns me is that people are much more concerned of trusting their information to the government than trusting this to private sector, I don't know, social media platforms. We're so relaxed using our Facebook and all this kind of other, not to mention Google here, and all the other platforms, we just give our information, just take it. without actually having absolutely no idea what somebody else is doing with our information. And we have also President Ilves sitting here, and he said also the sentence once that I repeat in every of my conference, that we shouldn't be scared of this kind of big brother in Estonia, but more about the small sister. And the small sister is our social media and again, all these private sector platforms that we just use so freely. So I would say let's try to be a little bit more concerned about what information we put and trust to private sector, not so much about like, at least in Estonia, that's how I feel that today.
Okay, Mr. Director,
talking about cloud, of course, and I think and the trust. So this is something that combines both components. We can read the quite recently published trusted cloud principles and agreed by vendors, and also some requirements from the government. And I think those 5 principles that I would like to quote here will be a good foundation really for the trusted relationship and broader use of cloud-based services. Like governments should engage customers first with only narrow exceptions. So that's the first rule. The second, customers should have a right to notice about access to their data. The third, cloud providers should have a right to protect customers' interests. The fourth, government should address conflict of law, just in case of jurisdiction, and of course, as we know, discussion about Cloud Act. And the fifth, government should support cross-border data flows. Those principles, I think, are very crucial for the broader use and the trusted relationship with vendors.
Okay, and how it looks like from military perspective. I'm going back to Justina in the meantime. Later on, sorry.
Later,
just,
okay. Military, not my side, of course.
From our perspective, the most crucial is, of course, the sharing of the data. I think that the vital informations about the military personnel should be gathered here in our systems. And we have a strict rule about even if the military personnel have been tested in the civilian hospitals. So we have been preparing specific solutions for military medical institutions who have been gathering information about the COVID tests, etc., etc. And we collected the data and we processed the data inside our systems, completely outside of the whole system, I mean the civilian system. So this is the first rule, and I think that the second rule, in terms of the data sharing, we incorporated a lot of mechanisms for communications inside the systems who consolidated and which actually the systems provided means for processing the personal data outside of the civilian domain. This is the strict approach, because we have been afraid that through the sharing of the data, for just letting the people to use the officially available communicators, we will be sharing the fragile and volatile data outside of the military domain.
So, Justina, do you think that, well, trust and also privacy, what I've heard from you, is the key to move to move public services to cyberspace?
I think for sure you were talking about it, digital skills. It's and from the perspective of education, what we are doing, we are at schools are preparing students, young people to be prepared to work. But we need to not to forget about being prepared to spend safely, cyber safely, our leisure time. It's so crucial nowadays. And for example, the statistics are like, okay, we spend around 15% of our time working, but the rest of the 100 minus period, it's almost like 85 and more plus time on leisure time. What does it mean? It means that those digital skills are so super important when we are spending our leisure time. Leisure time, so of course, plenty of social medias, games, etc., etc. So from the perspective of cybersecurity, even when we are at work, we are secured by our institution. But when we are spending time by ourselves, then only institution that is cyber secured us is me, is you. So it's very important to teach from the very beginning also how to spend this free time, not only how to be prepared to work. So I think it's a little bit missing point in the whole agendas of also governments, and I think it's very important to not forget about it.
Okay, I think it's not the missing point, it was already underpinned during our discussion by the Google representatives. So that's the key, is the mix of trust, of the competences, and also UX, that it has to become more and more friendly. I would like to ask a final question to Colonel Chmielewski and also Mr. Director, and then I will go back to you, Justyna, and ask you to answer our initial question about and share your perspective after COVID-19. But gentlemen, nowadays, bring your own device policy is getting more and more popular. What is your perspective about it? And do you know any national security agency or any national entity which implemented this policy successfully? You don't know.
The silence is commenting the issue itself. So I stated before, in Ministry of Defense, we have a strict rule that bring your own device. It's not a solution for us. We incorporate our own technologies. We deliver the solutions based on selected hardware platforms. We incorporate our tools, security tools, inside the devices, and we do not allow our people to process the professional data. We even scratch the devices by ourselves in terms of the security issues and possible security problems after the usage of such devices. We know for sure that several vendors have been developing their own solutions for bring your own device, but we use the mechanism, the crypto mechanisms and the security mechanism in the devices for our good. So we deliver the platforms by ourselves and incorporate our mechanisms like mobile device management systems to allow the people in the personal data processing mechanisms to share the data inside the devices, inside our teleinformation systems.
So, and I have different view, of course. Usually the governments and militaries are a few years behind of technology and few years behind of industry in adoption of new software.
We have to be
of new solutions. And I think this is true. But of course, from the past, it was always said that let's check the technology, let's give industry to check the technology, and we will adopt proven solutions. I think with digital services, digital technologies, we do not have this comfort. So when we look at the enterprises, most of the enterprises are using bring your own device policy, but they adopt it in the correct way. So that's about governance, that's about security baselines, that's about actually monitoring. So I think government will go there and military will go there in some time. Like a few years ago, nobody thought about even cloud computing model to be adopted by government and military. That's a question, of course, we should better understand technology, adopt it correctly, and then be more productive and more secure with those devices. You ask about examples. I think one of the best examples was, I think that was President Obama who was using his own device.
Yeah.
And Secret Service tried to convince him just to move to protected BlackBerry solution that time. But of course, we have some examples from some domains where the bring your own device policy can be adopted, can be used, and can be secured better than private devices used for processing professional information sometimes, because people are trying to look for shortages. And in case of shortages, of course, it's always create the cost for security.
Okay, so to finalize our discussion, I would like to give the floor to Justyna. I just want you to tell us what is your perspective when it comes to this year and a half, how these times change national approach toward public services, implementing public services in cyberspace.
So it was a very tough time for all of us around the world. So and we are not talking about if we should digitalize anything, and of course in cyber concerning all the cybersecurity stuff. But how to do that? How to do it effectively, and how to do it cyber safely? And of course, plenty of spheres, plenty of things are still to do. And but how we see, and probably you were talking about it, what Chancellor Prime Minister has done when it comes to also with Minister Book back then, when it comes to digitalize all the programs, projects concerning COVID, and how to run it, of course, safely and pretty fast, because we didn't have time to do it. Everybody was wanted us to do it as soon as possible. Quarantine, etc., etc. I can repeat all those things, and also because of Minister Book, this was successful because she was responsible for also such things like telecommunication, etc. So very, very challenging times. But to sum up and not to prolong, because I can see that we have run out of time, but it is very important not to, hopefully, in the foreseeable future and very shortly, the pandemic will stop. But hopefully this change, this leapfrog will not end. And we still think about all those digitalization, that it is important, and cybersecurity also. I hope so.
Well, I think that last year and a half, showed us that we need to balance the speed of implementing new solutions, the cost, the security, and we have to balance this with the need that we are having. So I suggest all of you, I invite all of you, our audience, to approach our distinguished guest behind the scenes to elaborate a little bit more on the issue we discussed during this panel. And thank you very much. I also invite you for subsequent panels today. Thank you.